and gentlemen, your attention, please.
Welcome. I am here with my guest, Ellie Leonard. I'm Marlon Weems, the publisher of the Journeyman newsletter on Substack. And Ellie is well, I guess I almost said Epstein whisperer, but I don't know if I like
No, thank you.
I kind of maybe we got to come up with something.
I know there are weird names.
Certainly you are the go-to person as it relates to just sort of, I guess combing through the files so we don't have to.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I'm trying to keep this from being as dark as it feels.
I know
I think, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is that for the last week, I have just been, knee deep in the other, screw up, which is the Iran war, which is a whole different show. But It occurred to me that, now the Epstein Files is kind of not the top head, not above the fold, as they say. So, I just wanted to catch up and, hear what awful shit I missed.
Do ya?
I mean, there's just really no polite way to put it. I mean, every time I see something that you've written, it's just one extra thing.
Yeah. And it's, I know there's a lot of like this idea of distraction, which I absolutely 100% think is true. I think anything Trump does is even if it's not the main idea, it's partially the idea is to be a distraction away from things. And we had some pretty big information drop. I think it was last Friday, kind of around the same time all this stuff is happening. But then on the other hand, I think like, I don't know, I'm of like 12 different minds on this entire story. Like this idea that people do get burnout and they do hit walls, when investigating this stuff. And there's people who've been doing it, eons longer than I have. I'm a greenhorn. I got here late to the party. But this idea that it does go in waves, a big investigation that is not seemingly having an ending goes in waves because our bodies need to reset, our brains need to reset. Like we have to navigate investigating and writing about things with life and people and families. But then on the other side of that is like the I don't know what the word is, the entitlement that I get to ebb and flow, that I get to take a break, or that I get to burn out, because the survivors in the story don't get that, right? They don't get to walk away from it, and they don't get to like burn out and be like, what, I think I just need to take a week off from this. Like, they don't get to do that. And so, bearing in mind self-care and sleeping enough and eating enough and watching my kids and hanging out, I also bear in mind that if it were my children or if it were somebody that I know going through this, I wouldn't want people to let up. And so, in the ways that we can continue to investigate the story and not forget about what's happening, without totally like falling off a cliff, that's what we're going to do, because, this thing that's happening in Iran is just so over the top ridiculous. And yesterday him saying we're at the end, but we're also just getting started. And he's like, it's both. So you're like, okay, so that's
like that meme, right? Why not both?
Sure. I mean, they're opposite, but sure.
At the same time.
Right. So it's like, that's going to do what it's going to do. It's either going to end or it's going to be
Mhm.
another 20-year war that was unnecessary. And this case is still going to continue. And so if we stop focusing on it, if we completely drop the ball, then we kind of start over. And I think we're finally at a point where we're gaining traction with it, that we don't want to do that.
Absolutely not. And so what the sort of the last thing that I remember sort of knowing something about was that there was I guess, an interview that the FBI did with an accuser.
Yeah.
I believe it was a woman that was saying, that basically Trump had assaulted her sexually when she was 13.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And I'm not sure if this is the same story, but I remember back in 2016, like right before he was,
Mhm.
right before the election. And I think it was Gloria Allred, or maybe her
Yes,
daughter.
her daughter. Hmm.
Right, okay. And they were gonna do this big press conference,
Yep.
and this woman who was making a similar accusation, if
Yeah.
not, I don't know if it was the same one. And it got right up. I mean, they had the press set up and everything. And
Mhm.
then it was just like she said, no, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm getting too many death threats. Are
Yep.
we talking about the same person, or are
No,
there so?
there is more
I
than
was
one.
hoping
So
that your answer would be something else. I mean, so
yeah.
there are more than one third,
Yeah.
person.
Well, and
who's-
even in the first one, the first one is Katie Johnson, which people are more familiar with, and
Okay,
her case can sometimes confuse people because she refiled, I think, 3 times, and it was because
okay,
the first time she filed, she had no legal team. It was just her, and so she kind of made mistakes on her filings, and so she withdrew, and then she refiled. Um, I believe as Jane Doe. She changed over from Katie Johnson, which is also a pseudonym, to Jane Doe.
okay.
And then she
Oh,
got a
so wait
legal
a minute.
team.
Katie Johnson is a pseudonym.
Katie Johnson is a pseudonym. Yes, that's not her
Okay,
actual name.
okay,
So then she switched over to Jane Doe. And then there were other people in her story. There was another child in her story of with the allegations against Trump. And her allegations sort of fit the timeline of when this would have happened. It was the 90s.
mm,
Some of Epstein's MO stuff that was familiar. And it was credible enough for her to be investigated and for her to be represented by Lisa Bloom, who's Gloria Allred's daughter.
Lisa
And
Bloom.
they're
Okay,
yeah, and they're a very credible law firm. They represent a lot of survivors. So it was credible enough to them for them to take the case, which is, for me, that's always sort of a milestone when I look at some of these stories that show up in the news or show up in the files. It's like, did the FBI ever talk to them? Did they ever have a legal team that was willing to represent them? If they did, that's credibility. If nobody was ever willing to touch the case, maybe less credibility. Doesn't mean it's not true, but those things kind of stand out. And so she ended up, it's kind of funny because I was on another podcast with a guy named Ed Opperman. And Ed Opperman, I hadn't really heard much about him, but he'd reached out because I was doing a write-up on the Sasha Riley story, which was a few months ago, about this other accuser. And he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, you want to do a podcast?" And in the middle of the podcast, he goes, "Oh, you didn't know I was Katie Johnson's private investigator?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." I said, "We have a lot more to talk about." He goes,
okay.
"Oh, yeah, yeah." So he knows everything about her, where she lived, her entire case, because she hired him. And what ultimately ended up happening in that case, because again, she withdrew about 4 days before the election, which is significant, and she was willing to talk. She was willing to show her name and her face. There was some kind of a breach and like a hack that came into the law firm, came into a lot of these like legal files where all of her information was kept. There was some sort of a hack that they were able to trace back, I believe, to Israel, I want to say is where the hack originated.
Hmm.
And that terrified her so much that she pulled out. And she didn't, I mean, she surprised everybody, she surprised her legal team and everything. But when she found that out, she was just like, I'm not doing this. Like, that's way too
I
dangerous.
mean,
I don't
really,
want to.
you don't want to like
Yeah.
be on the wrong side of Mossad, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So and it was all, it was all researched and legitimate, and like they found all the information. So that's why she ended up pulling out. This second case is very interesting because there was a piece of it in the files, which I didn't know till after the other parts were released, but there were, I believe, 57, 53 missing pages of these interviews where a woman who was 13 years old at the time accused Epstein and Donald Trump. And I believe it was some reporters from NPR discovered it, that this case actually existed, the notes actually
Okay.
existed, but it was not in the files. So they were very smart in their research, and they found out about it. People started yelling about it, and we ended up with parts of these files. We're still missing over 30 pages of them. But what it is there was a young girl living in South Carolina on Hilton Head Beach, or Hilton Head Island. And her mother was a realtor. She was like a broker for, vacation condos. And
Okay.
so she had, according to her, her mother had rented a condo to Epstein, but they didn't know who he was, obviously. He was just a guy. And her mom had encouraged her to put out flyers, because this is 1984, had encouraged her to put out flyers to babysit, because that's a great job. You have all these people in condos with kids. And so she did, and this guy called her, said he wanted to do an interview with her. She went over, and it was Jeffrey Epstein, which she still didn't know at the time. She did not know that that's who that was later. And then
Let
it
me
kind
ask
of
you
like,
something right there.
yeah, go ahead.
Would anybody have known, I
No.
mean, was he's just
He
a
was
guy that
growing.
nobody
He
knew,
was
was like
growing,
a
but he
serial
wasn't.
killer almost,
Right.
Oh
So,
man.
and he would have been, about 30. He was wealthy, but not like exorbitantly wealthy like we know of him as being now.
Right.
And he didn't live in Palm Beach yet. He didn't have a lot of these kind of things that we think about, like this 55-year-old sex offender,
Yeah.
100 millionaire. Like he was not the same guy, but working towards that. And so, she describes a lot of things that are very familiar. He ended up taking her back to New York on 3 different occasions, I believe. And then that's where she claimed to have met Donald Trump, which she didn't actually originally tell the FBI. She had a very close confidant from high school who told the FBI that, who was somebody that she had told this story when she was much, much younger. Like she had said this story a
Okay.
long time ago, didn't know who Epstein was. Epstein had been arrested, and her friend's like, I need you to take a look at this guy, because this is familiar to me. And she has all these really interesting details. This is what I've been digging into all week, is these very finite, interesting details. One of them is that she remembered whoever the guy was. His name was Jeff. That he looked like Lurch from the Addams Family, and that's what she remembered. Which, I mean,
Okay.
that hits. She describes things like later on she had a panic attack because somebody was wearing cologne that sort of triggered her back to that time, and they figured out that his cologne was something called gray flannel. Well, gray flannel was very
Right.
popular in the early
I
80s.
remember it.
Yes, she remembered him wearing something called a cardboard shirt, which is Tyvek. It was a very popular material. It's almost like tent material, but it's crinkly. And she
Okay.
remembered his shirt being made out of that. She had details, like she said there was a Rick James concert that she went to in Savannah in 1986, I want to say. And she said that Epstein was there, and that was something where you could literally look up the concert series, and it existed, which, I mean, hypothetically, if she was making the story up, she could do that research, but it felt, it's pretty researchy. She had said some things that were not the typical things that we think of with Epstein. Like she said his favorite drink was, I think, gin and tonic, which later we know him as like a teetotaler, so he didn't drink later in life. But that doesn't mean when he was 30 years old, he didn't have a drink once in a while. It doesn't mean that like normally later in life, he wouldn't have been at a concert because he was not very social. He didn't like to go out. But like when he's young, maybe he did. But then a lot of the other stuff really lined up. He didn't want any black girls. He told her no black girls, which totally lines up with his MO. He told her that he wanted girls brought back to the house from her high school. And then there's this case where what she says is that her mother, or she discovered that Epstein had like Polaroids of her, because this is the 80s. We don't have any,
Right.
we don't
No
have digital
digital.
anything. And she'd found a drawer with Polaroids in it of her and of other girls, and she got in trouble for finding it. And she said that her mother had tried to get these photos back, and there was some sort of an embezzlement case with her mother and the real estate office that she says had to do with her trying to get these photos back, and that the man who ran the complex, so it's a very well-known high-end vacation complex on Highland Beach. The man who owned it was friends with Epstein. He lived in Ohio, wasn't Leslie Wexner, but somebody involved with like the education system. And that they had basically blackmailed the mother, and then she ended up getting in trouble for embezzling. And you can find all these case records. You can find, like she said, her mom bought a house in 1981 for $55,000. You can go find the deed for the house. It's exactly that. So there's things that like super line up. But now, if there's any provability to the case, because she does have a criminal record, she does have issues with drugs and alcohol, which is not unusual with a lot of sexual assault survivors.
Say, isn't that almost like, you know, that
par for the course
kind of, you know, yeah.
And she also was that very typical girl that he looked for, who didn't come from a terribly stable home. Like her mom had struggles too.
I was just going to ask, you said that she started going to New York. You know, how did her mom, because like you said, they're not the typical story that you hear. So what? Her mom was just letting her. I don't
know. Yeah, and that's a story in a lot of these stories from survivors where you go, why would your mom and dad be okay with that? But then I don't know their family dynamic. But this girl was from New York originally, so there could have been any kind of story about her going back to New York to see whoever. I don't know. But she also, I believe, was fairly independent from her family. Like, I don't know how. I don't think they were the typical household, I would say, that when you think of parents and children. But there's just a lot of details now that I'm able to kind of go track down that are things that she specifically said in these interviews with the FBI agents, where she said, you know, this is my record. This is my history. I'm going to be very honest with you about the things that I've done in my life, but I need that not to affect what I'm saying to you now. Like she lays it all out on the table, and you can go find the records. You can go find the police reports. You can go find everything. And it was very tough. I don't think I've ever researched this hard in my life, because it's all pre-internet. It's all microfiche and photocopies and old clippings from newspaper articles that are on like archival websites. Like you have to find all these bits and pieces in order to set the stage for what she's saying actually happened. And then you have two main things that we have to figure out. We have to figure out if there's any kind of a record of Epstein renting a vacation home during that period, because there is records of him flying there. It was a hotbed for like wealthy individuals to meet up.
Especially in the 80s. It was really like,
So like there's a lot of that. If we can get any kind of a, you know, I found one of the realtors who worked down there is still alive. I said, if there's any kind of a paper record that we could verify this, but then also this idea that he was friends with Donald Trump that early, which is not on the record. And we don't have him hanging out with Trump that early, but all these other people in this investigation have said like, oh no, I started hanging about with Epstein on this date of this year for sure. And then we go look and they knew each other a decade longer. Like there's several instances of that. So I don't hold it that Trump didn't know him before the 90s. I think it's very likely that a guy who was worked in the finance and real estate world, was a multimillionaire, was very social in New York City, wouldn't know Donald Trump. I'm sure he knew Donald Trump. And so it's just kind of like proving that.
How are they, you know, just age wise, what's the separation between Epstein and Trump?
Oh, they, I think they're about 5.
But they're pretty close in age though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because Epstein was born in 1953, and I think Trump is like 47 or 48 or something like that. 47 maybe. So they're 6 years apart. So they would have been relatively close. They would have interacted, if not on a social level, they definitely would have interacted on a business level. Epstein was very involved with modeling and getting involved with the modeling industry with Trump, obviously. And so there's some heavy things that have to be proven in order to prove this case. But also, I don't work for the FBI, and they found it credible enough to interview her 4 times. So I take that as important. Like even if it was just one interview with her with the FBI, like we all don't get to make an accusation and immediately go get a phone call with the FBI like that. There are
Right.
steps, you have to be credible enough to get there. You first speak with your local police department, and then you go move on, and then you move on. And so she got to the FBI and had an interview, and then they interviewed her 3 more times, and they interviewed her friend who she spoke to years and years and years earlier about the case before she, Epstein was not always a household name. We didn't always just think of him when we think of these cases. And so when somebody reports something long before the rest of us have heard anything about someone, like that matters. We perk up our ears.
I was just thinking about this when I worked in New York. You sit on a trading desk, and it's not like on TV where people are like,
Yeah.
on paper and doing all, because it's electronic. It went
Right.
electronic right at the time that I went to New York. And so a lot of the time you're just sitting there just watching, 6 different screens, and you got trades that are going on, but
Yeah.
it's all automated, and you just sort of set it and just make sure it doesn't screw up, right? So all that to say, guys are just sitting in a row, and people are just talking about random shit, just whatever.
Right.
And I can remember, I talked to the guy yesterday. I remember this guy saying, yeah, there's this guy and he's got this black book, and he's got shit on everybody. And I don't remember that.
That's
a name
wild.
was mentioned. I'm like, really? What's the story? And so
That's so wild.
when you're in that business, you're tangential to a whole lot of stuff, not all of it good. And we were just talking about this the other day. So there are restaurants in New York, and then there was a place. I think COVID probably did away with it, and it was up like on the Upper East Side, this big brownstone, and it was called Bruno's. Somebody had turned it into a restaurant, but you had to know somebody. You couldn't just like
I've heard of those.
And you had to literally, and he was like, man, I bet we were sitting next to this guy in Bruno's and didn't even know who he was. And it's just, I mean, nothing weird was going on. It's great food, but it was like a private restaurant. And New York is notorious for that kind of stuff.
Man,
But
I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna write it down and look that up, because if he did,
Bruno's. It was
Bruno's.
I'll ask my guy. I want to say it was like in the 80s, Upper East Side. I'll find out, and I'll let you know.
Well, I know like Cipriani's was like a huge one for them as well.
Yeah,
that
was downtown. This was in a neighborhood, so you didn't even. There was no sign. You just had to
to New York.
This restaurant.
Yeah,
and the food was great, but there were all the waitresses were like 10s. Like these women who look like they really didn't need to be waitresses, but that was the whole ambiance of it. And it was a place where you take a client and, they would never have seen anything like it, because, if they were from out of
interesting.
So
I'm going to totally look into this. I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go walk the neighborhood.
I went there once with this guy. You had to really, it was like Rayo's. Have you ever heard of Rayo's?
No.
Okay. I have a draft of a story, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Okay. This is the restaurant where Kash Patel was when Charlie Kirk got murdered, assassinated, whatever. He was in New York, if you remember. Kash Patel was in New York having dinner, and he was texting and screwing up, doing what he does. He was at Rayo's, and I have always thought that was an interesting place for him to be having dinner, because again, you can't just walk in Rayo's like you're going to, the Olive Garden or something. And the reason, I mean, Rayo's has got a really interesting history. It's a mob restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay. So the head of the FBI is having dinner at a
That's
sort of notorious mob restaurant, and nobody seemed to say anything about this when it came out. And so Rayo's got started. It was like a saloon back, 1800s or whatever. And then, it is in a neighborhood that's sort of known as an Italian mafioso, whatever, enclave.
Right.
And now, if you go to the store, you can buy Rayo's pasta sauce. And you can buy all kinds of Rayo's stuff. Rayo's pizza, by the way, Rayo's frozen pizza, very good. All of that stuff got spun off. Like one of the, as it got passed down, one of the family members had, they spun off all that business. But Rayo's literally, it only has like 10 tables. And you inherit a table at Rayo's. So it's like, and Trump doesn't have a table at Rayo's. I know this.
That's probably good.
Trump doesn't have a table at Rayo's, but like, have you ever heard of Bo Dietl? He's like a sort of famous. Okay, so he's got a table at Rayo's, and
interesting.
You literally, it's like your name is on this table, and and if you're friends with Bo Dietl and you're going to New York, you can say, "Hey man, can you get me into Rayo's?" And that's how you get in. Okay. You don't just like go. It is probably, it's the hardest restaurant to get in New York and maybe even on earth. Seriously.
Interesting. How do you spell it?
R-A-O, plural.
Oh, just R-A-O. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, crazy New York stuff. But these are the kinds of places when I think of guys like Epstein, I just, that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I wrote about Cipriani's a while back because I kept hearing about it.
Yeah.
As like a hot spot, but it was like to be seen. It was a place to be seen.
Yeah.
Like you or I could get there, but like discovering how many people among like Trump and Weinstein and different, well-known sex offenders got sexually assaulted in the restaurant. Like
what?
Multiple people have been.
So
There's
wait
like
a minute.
stairwell.
So this is I don't know if it's always been at this location. It's downtown. Like
I think there's two. I believe there's two.
There's one in Midtown.
I think Midtown, and then I think Lower.
Yeah, Lower Manhattan. Maybe? So that's the one I know.
Manhattan.
I've been to that restaurant, and it was cool because they had this balcony on the second floor, and tables. So you're sitting there and you're overlooking because it's Wall Street. I don't know which street it's on, but when you get down to Lower Manhattan, the streets are so compressed that, it's so even if you're not on Wall Street, you're almost there because it's just that way. And like you said, whenever they open, they have one of those, they'll have the what do you call them? Klieg lights outside, the big.
Oh, the little.
Yeah. And the ones like I always think of 20th Century Fox, those big
little spotlights.
They'll have those set up, and then they'll have one of those backdrops that'll, so people stand in front of it. And
I think they're called a step and repeat.
And I'm with so and so, right? So that's
so lame.
It's a place where you go when you want to be noticed. So
well, and it was. I mean. Anybody who's ever landed up in the news for something improper has had an experience in there, but also they got that restaurant with a loan from the mob, from both the Genovese family and what's the other one? They got a loan from both. And then one of the guys, I have to go back and look at this, but it's involved with like a lot of the Trump dealings and how he was not reporting his money. And so one of them from the Genovese family or somebody turned state's witness, I think against Trump, but also against the mob.
Oh,
anyway, it was a long rabbit hole, but
it was all thing I wore my.
Yeah, right.
Well, and this one is the grandfather.
I saw that.
There's a story, but so my wife was getting me. I'm a big mob movie fan, and so she got me The Godfather, but it was accidentally it was the grandfather. So when I put it on, she was like mortified, right? And
That's
so
so
yeah.
funny.
So I've
I watched the Untouchables a couple weeks ago.
which one? Like
Um,
the TV show or the movie?
no, the movie, Robert De Niro,
Oh boy.
because which I love old 1930s mob movies. I just like that
Yeah.
aesthetic. Um, like I just like that period of time. I think of like Sinners that just came out, like just that
Yeah.
quality of movie. But I
Don't get me
watched it
started to talking
because
about Sinners, please.
I know, right?
This show will take a turn.
Yeah, I did. But I watched it because I went to an event called State of the Swamp in DC a couple weeks ago, and I knew Robert De Niro was going to be there. I didn't know
Mm.
if I would, I'm probably not going to see him, but I was like, I can't walk up to him and have my only reference at hand be Meet the Parents. Like I can't have that be the
Oh no.
reference in my head.
Oh,
And I've seen a lot of his movies, but I was like, that's the only thing I've seen in a while. So I was like, okay, I got to watch this. And then I ended up leaving before he spoke because I don't even know what I was thinking. If I thought that he wasn't actually coming, I don't know what I was thinking, but I ended up in a bar with my former governor and senator, and I just had a jolly old time for the rest of the evening doing that. But I watched that movie the night before just in case we had a conversation so I wouldn't look like an idiot.
you know, if I were going to pick, if I were going to advise you on the Robert De
Mhm.
Niro movies, I would have actually, my original thought was, I guess it's Godfather Part Two that he's in,
Mhm.
but really, my favorite, Robert De Niro as a gangster is Goodfellas. You
Goodfellas,
know,
yeah.
oh my goodness, if you've never seen that,
I have. It's been a very, very long time. My husband is
well,
like the
that's too
buff with
long.
all them.
You,
Yeah, I know,
you
right?
do, yeah. I have a problem. I know the lines. I mean, so yeah, it's
We live in a we live in the very quintessential area for like The Sopranos, which I get is totally different. I don't want to be offensive towards the Goodfellas, but like
no,
just that
no, it's
quintessential like mobster Italian
yeah,
stereotype area. Like
Gabagool
it's
and all the
all
stuff.
of it. And it's so funny because we moved here and there would be things like
Wait,
coffee
are you in
shops.
New
Just
Jersey?
I'm in New Jersey, yeah, but I'm
Oh,
real close.
okay.
I'm real close to downtown.
Well, I
So
used to live in
I
New Jersey. I moved to North Carolina from New Jersey. I
okay,
used
okay.
I
So
used to
yeah,
live
I'm in
in Edgewater.
Edgewater. Okay.
Yeah,
So I'm
so
very
right on
near.
that, so you got Fort Lee,
Mhm.
right, at the bridge, and then if you just kinda go south, you go
Right.
through all you can't even tell that you've gone through a town, I haven't been
Right.
there in years. The
Well, you
last time
stand
I
on a
was
corner and there's like 4 towns. There's
yeah,
like one
yeah,
on every corner. They're
and
super
it's
close.
like, Edge I mean, yeah, it's like Fort Lee, Edgewater, and then
Mhm.
there's Weehawken,
Yep.
and so I lived in Weehawken for a minute. When I first got there to New York,
Yeah.
that's where I was. So, yeah,
Well,
good time.
I mean, it's the food is amazing. I will just
Oh,
put that out
yeah,
there.
no joke.
Amazing. Anything, yeah. Coffee is amazing. But it's funny when we moved here because we moved here from like the Midwest, like
Oh, no,
polar opposite.
culture
and
shock.
yeah, and we go in a place and it would be like a coffee shop. And these are people that are like sponsoring my kids' baseball teams. So like they've got the shirt for all the different places. But you go, it looks like a coffee shop on the outside, but I go inside, it doesn't feel like a coffee shop. And someone goes, that's because it's a
There
coffee
was
shop.
just there was
They serve great coffee,
I
but it's
enjoy
not
an
a coffee shop.
occasional cigar, and there was a
Yeah.
cigar place. And when I would walk my black ass in there, I just was like, I hope this is going to turn out okay. But it was like
Yeah.
guys that literally just sat there. They just sat around all day
Old
and they
men.
just
Yeah, old
drink,
men at
yeah,
tables.
just
Yeah.
drinking coffee and smoking cigars. And,
Yeah.
after they see you a couple of times, and yeah. And back in those days, I almost always had a suit
Yeah.
on. So,
Yeah.
they could reasonably think I might be somebody with, I don't know,
Yeah.
the FBI or something, but they
Right.
would just really look at me a whole lot more than I wanted to be, just
Right.
sort of
Well,
examined.
and they're
But
not like ours, they're all speaking Italian. So you have a whole little coffee shop where the tables are full of old men, all speak
Yeah.
Italian. Then they all move outside to go smoke a cigarette. Then they all go back to the tables. But when you walk in, because I used to take my son in there because he liked the little Nutella muffins. And so we go get the little Nutella muffins. And they have like Italian digestive aids in large jars. They have homemade Italian tuna fish. They've got
Oh
cigarettes and
man, I
lotto
remember
tickets.
this stuff.
And like when you walk in, everybody stops talking and just watches you. And so you just kind of like quietly order your coffee and then you thank you, let's go.
I miss
And
the rainbow cookies.
oh, rainbow cookies. What about rainbow bagels? Did you get the rainbow bagels?
I have not. No.
Oh,
The
lots of
rainbow
food coloring.
cookies. Whew. I mean, you
And
know,
they've
they
got
have them down here, but there's some kind of, you know,
something in
factory
'em.
something. I mean, they look the colors are right and everything, but it's not the same. That and
Heavy food coloring.
cannolis. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yeah, we have I mean, grocery shopping here is a huge experience
Oh
because
yeah.
like they have to accommodate multiple cultures, so they get their own like wings of the store, but you get the unstuffed cannolis. Like the grandmas come in, they get the cannoli shells so they can go home
So
and
they
stuff
can take them
themselves.
home and make the
Yeah. I mean, the
oh
best.
man. That's one of the few things that we miss about living up
Yeah.
there. I mean, you could do any culture that you wanted, but my favorite thing only in New York. So my office was, you know, I worked downtown for a while, but when I finished up, I was in Midtown. And so I could take the subway, jump off in Chinatown, you know, walk over and just get like a big old gigantic hunk of salmon, totally like fresh.
Yeah.
They would double bag it,
Yeah.
you know, because you don't want to stink up the subway, right? I jumped back on the
People bring
subway.
couches on the subway.
I jumped back on the subway, you know, get off downtown, and then I jump on the ferry, which would take me across over, you know, to where I lived. And, you know, you walk in the house and you got this big old pound of, you know, salmon fresh. You bought it on your way
probably a
home from
lot
work.
cheaper than at the grocery store. Like
Oh, it's
it's
nothing. I mean, considering, you know.
Yeah.
But
There's a lot of places that don't ever raise their prices. Like even in the economy that we have, like there are these, you know, because the bagel shop is king here. You go get your egg, and you know, and they always say salt, pepper, ketchup, and which is a New Jersey thing. When you get your egg
I
bagel,
know,
you say
man.
salt, pepper, ketchup.
You're actually making me miss New York. I have not missed New York.
But like
New
you go
Jersey.
in there and these families will give you a drink and a giant egg sandwich and it's $5. And I just think like, have they never raised their price? They must be losing so much money at this point, but they just don't ever raise their prices because they just
the crazy thing is, you know, like in Manhattan, you know, they got the street vendors.
Yeah.
And then you end up where you've got a guy.
Yes.
Like when I'm going to work, there's a guy and he's right there at the same spot every morning. And I would get a banana and a coffee with half and half. And after a while, the guy sees you coming, he just starts pouring.
He knows,
he already knows your, you know, it's like
I did that. I visited for 3 days and
everybody
they did that.
knows your name, right? This guy knew my coffee. And
it is wild. They will, like, I remember when I first came to New York, I had a knish for the first time and I just thought it was the best food in the entire world. I'd never had a knish before. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's like a pizza pocket filled with mashed potatoes. It's amazing. And I remember I went to a food truck to get it, and he's like, "You really?" And then it was so delicious. I came back later that same day, and I got another one. He's like, "You like those?" And I was like, "Yes, I like these." And he goes, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, what's your name? What time are you going to be back?" And I came back, and he knew my name. He had my order ready, and it was just a little food truck on the side of like Times Square somewhere. But he had
the thing about New York is it is so competitive. Everything's competitive. So if you're the vendor who can't that little extra service, then you're no different than the guy right, you know, 10 feet from you. And so, yeah, it's crazy. I had like a car guy because we were, if I worked past 7 o'clock in the evening, then I could get a car, you know, and this was, the company I worked for was Cantor Fitzgerald owned 49% of the company I worked for. So we got access to Cantor Fitzgerald's fleet of limos, not the big stretch ones,
Right.
but like
Like
the
the black town cards.
Lincoln, yeah. And so I had a guy, you know, Bernard, and he's a Haitian guy, and he was just, I'd call him up and just, hey man, I'm at such and such place, and sometimes, he'd do off the book stuff, because this was before Uber really was a thing. Right. It had kind of started, because that's, I think, where it first started was in Manhattan, but it hadn't become what it is now. So I never fooled with that. I just had my guy, So yeah, New York.
I always wonder when you see all these food trucks lined up on the street, you what is it, like 9 o'clock at night, whenever they leave, they have to get those things off the road and down the street. And like, I don't even like driving in New York City. I can't imagine getting a food truck off the sidewalk and pulling out into traffic. And like, a lot of them are on like bikes pulling, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, how in the world? And they just like, or they'll walk them, they'll like pull them and walk them just right out into traffic. I'm just like,
it's nuts. You just do what you have to do, I guess, right?
Yeah. I guess so, but it's good.
Let me ask you something, just we kind of got off on I shouldn't have mentioned Rayo's. Anyway, and I don't even know if this is something you've looked at in particular. Just the whole progression of Epstein just makes no sense to me. And what I mean is, he's a teacher in a private school, but he's not qualified. He goes from that to a job on Wall Street at Bear Stearns. He's not really qualified. You just, like, all these things are occurring. Why'd they hire him to teach math at a prep? Like, what, I understand it. I guess one of the more expensive private, well, they're all expensive.
Yeah. It's $70,000 a year to go there.
And you bring this guy in. Why would they do that? And wasn't it Bill Barr's dad? Am I wrong on this?
Donald Barr.
I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
And then he goes to work and he gets hired by like Mo Greenberg, like the CEO of Bear Stearns.
Yep. And he was also offered a job at the New York Times in that period of time as well. Like,
I'm sorry, what was that?
He was also offered, when he was offered the job with Bear Stearns, he was also offered a job by Punch Sulzberger from the New York Times to go work at the New York Times. Why? Like, right. Why?
He qualified for nothing.
No college degree. Didn't finish college. There are interesting blanks in the story that we have yet to fill in. And people question what happened during those period of time. One of them is right after high school, he took a trip to Europe, and he took it on no money. He just went, and he was there for a long time. And people said when he came back, he was different. And then he went and he got a job at the Dalton School. There's also this period of time when he could have been in Hilton Head, South Carolina. There's a 7-year gap in the history where we don't know where he was, what he was doing. There is rumor that he was again
like Lee Harvey Oswald or somebody, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was in Europe. He was in the Middle East. He became connected to people so quickly, and it wasn't through his family. He was just a Brooklyn kid. His dad worked for like the Parks Department. His mom was I think a paraeducator. Something happened where he was groomed in a different way. He was groomed at some point to be connected. And my guess was that first trip to Europe when he was about 18 years old, 17 years old.
And the Maxwell connection is also kind of interesting.
It is very interesting.
That's a whole
and that's one of those. That's one of those stories where they go, no, he didn't meet her daughter until 1991, right after he died, coincidentally. So they never would have met. Well, no, he knew Robert Maxwell, and there's even bits and pieces if you look in the birthday book where they're talking about when he met, when they were hanging out with Robert Maxwell in the 70s and he met his teenage daughter. Well, that would have been Ghislaine Maxwell. Like, there's a lot of evidence of him knowing people earlier. And again, Robert Maxwell would have been Jeffrey Epstein 1.0. Like he was a mobster. He had a front as running publishing companies. He was pilfering off all of his
Well, didn't he like
employees.
bankrupt the pension fund or something like that?
He stole $400 million from the pensions of the people who worked for him, and then he was supposed to pay it back, and then he mysteriously showed up naked floating in the Atlantic, having quote unquote fallen off his yacht while peeing in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I got a yacht, but I'm gonna pee off the side of my boat. That just
Right, it's fine.
totally
And then left his family penniless, and then all of a sudden Jeffrey Epstein has $500 million, but also he's buried on the Mount of Olives, which is saved for like the highest, most important people in the Jewish religion, in like statesmen, not publishers, right? And his wife's not buried next to him. She didn't get to be buried next to him. She's buried in a normal person.
So, but he was a known criminal by the time he died, right?
Criminal. Mm-hmm. And he's buried on the Mount of Olives, which is one of the highest honors people can have. And so there's a lot there. And so we go, well, then when did Epstein meet him? Because Leslie Wexner knew him. There's that connection. You know, there's all this idea of intelligence, because Robert Maxwell was in British intelligence. He was likely in Israeli intelligence. Leslie Wexner was involved in Israeli intelligence. And then here you have this kid who comes over who wants more, hyperactive. I'm going to do it. I'm going to fake it till I make it, which was his mantra throughout life.
Mm-hmm.
And here you go. He's become Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow.
But I mean, it's like this idea of catch me as you can. If with kids, like his whole life, he pretended to be something else. People believed him. You have emails of like neurophysicists asking him
molecular
questions, and I'm just like, no college degree. Like he doesn't know that answer.
For the college dropouts, or
right. Good people,
out.
But not neurophysicists.
I didn't just flunk out of college and then go. You'd look up and I'm running a trading desk. There was like 20 years between that, where I just had to start at the ground and whatever. But it's just so. It just seems like if somebody like wrote this story and pitched it, it'd be like, well, this doesn't really seem realistic, Not
realistic, right? Yeah, he was the front person for, I think, a lot of things happening behind the scenes. Like people ask if he was involved with the mob. He was the mob. He was his own mob. Like that was his. Like if you think of the Genovese family, he was his own family. He created this own system that manipulated money, manipulated sex trafficking, manipulated global politics. He was at the White House, at the Treasury for meetings. Like we have these emails going that he's emailing Michael Wolff. He was manipulating journalism, and he's telling him, I'm sending things to Bill Barr during the Russia investigation to Mueller. And, Michael Wolff's like, all right, like he was so involved in so many things, and people just let him do it. It's why we never heard his name during Me Too. That is how much power he held, because he should have been mentioned. He should have been mentioned.
Top of the freaking list.
Yeah, never mentioned. But that's what $1 billion will do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had not thought about that.
Isn't that wild though?
Yeah.
Like how do you, and they were talking
like I
about
said,
it.
The first time I heard of someone who, it had to be Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
There was no name. It was like Kaiser Sose, there's this guy and he's got all this dirt and he's rich and blah, blah, blah. And that was his bread and butter. The craziest thing. I mean, I think you've already covered it, but is there anything like crazier that to me, the idea that Epstein, he gets arrested and he's put in jail with a guy who looks like he works for the mob.
Right. I mean, who very well could have. Yeah, he was.
Well, there's a story about that guy. He used to be a policeman.
Yep, and he killed 3 people.
What, in White Plains or some?
Yeah.
There's a story.
He was NYPD at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a bad guy, And it just,
It's
of
big,
all,
big is
the
huge.
roll of the dice,
Yeah.
that's, you
Well,
know.
that is a big story, and like I go back and forth on the idea of like I think Epstein is dead. That's my stance on that. But like how that
Mhm.
happened, right? Like
It's
that
suicide or
varies,
murder, which, which,
right? There's the idea of him because he only had 2 indictments against him, which is what he had the first time
yeah,
around,
why
and he
would
had to
you
go on
commit
work release. Yeah.
suicide over that? When you're
So
already like
yeah,
you got a $500 million,
right,
and I mean, why would you do that?
right. There's so many questions, but that there are weird, very, very weird things that happened in the jail. Along with the idea that he shouldn't have had a cellmate. He was a high profile person. They're not supposed to have a cellmate. They're supposed to be protected against having a cellmate
Mhm.
for their own welfare. Um, but he had several. He had Nicholas Tartaglione, who was the NYPD officer who killed 3
Yeah.
people, who was very violent temper. He had this guy named Efren Reyes who told him, later on that there's stories of him telling Epstein, the best way to protect yourself is to just pay off the people around you in the jail, and you're somebody who has a lot of money, that will protect you. Reyes was pulled from being his roommate a day before he died. And then Reyes ended up dying of COVID, I guess, later on, fairly
Mm.
recently, maybe. But then like there was also this guy, and I forget his name. I wrote it down the other day, but they were going to have him be Epstein's roommate, and he was the guy who sent explosive devices to 13 politicians. It's like
Oh
in
yeah,
2018. He
yeah,
was
yeah.
that they were going to they had a whole report that guy was going to be Epstein's roommate, and it's like, what are you
How
doing?
long
Like,
was he in
why?
jail?
I don't know, but
I mean, for
he
all
was
these different people that they're,
he was only in there like a month and a half, month and a half. No, like 5 weeks. And they were
and
going to
he
put these like
like
high
3 different
profile
roommates.
terrorists. Yes, and then like his first suicide attempt or whatever, when you look at all the reports and you line up all the reports, because all the guards have to like report what happened, everything varies, which is normal, but it varies so vastly. Like somebody's saying that he's up and walking around and talking to them, but doesn't want to answer their questions. Somebody else is saying he's getting chest compressions. Like everything was so poorly reported that you do start to say, well, what the hell happened here? Like why is it different for him? When you think of anybody else going to jail, there would be standard procedure. And like even down to like we have these videos of the jail, inside the jail, right? That
Mhm.
surveillance photo, and everybody's going watching these doors to the right. Those are not his doors. He was down the stairs, across the entire wing, up another flight of stairs, behind a door, down a hallway, but there were no cameras on because 9 out of the 11 cameras were not working that day. Only 2. Like there's just weird stuff. And I think that is probably, I mean, outside of solving the case and actually, you know, investigating the ranch and like getting the bad guys, that is like the biggest story in this is what happened to him in the jail, which
Mm.
is ironic because it
Oh, and
becomes
the
about him.
ranch. What?
The
How did I
ranch.
not know about this ranch?
So he's got an 8,000 acre
This is
ranch where
what, in New
in
Mexico?
New
Or
Mexico. Yeah. And it's never been investigated. No,
why?
great for
Why?
them.
I
Right.
don't
Of all the
understand.
places they didn't I know. Well, one of the guys on the list who was very involved was the governor of New Mexico. So that's probably why. But so now they're digging, right? They're out there digging at the ranch.
You mean
And
physically digging?
yeah,
Or digging?
they're
'Cause I
supposedly
heard something
investigating it.
yesterday about, the speculation that there might be
Mm,
some
bodies.
bodies out there.
Yeah, which I mean, he had a couple of buddies who were into choking. That was their MO.
Oh,
That's what they like
oh,
to do. And a lot of the girls that they brought out to the ranch were girls from Eastern Europe who didn't have IDs, who didn't have a lot of documentation, who people didn't know were there. So like if somebody died, that's not unlikely that somebody could get choked and not be revived and nobody
wow.
would ever miss them. So, but now they're digging, and I unless they come up with something amazing, like I just feel like they're digging just to quiet everybody down and be like, look, we're digging
Performative,
a
yeah.
hole. Look at us. Because
I
they
mean,
had
'cause at
30
this
years.
point,
Right.
at this point, it's almost like in Goodfellas that, there's a guy that they bury, and then, like, a decade later, there's like
Yeah.
some condos getting built, and they have to go get the guy, go dig him up and take him somewhere
Right.
else. So
Right. And it's just
Wow.
And we weren't even allowed to investigate because like the guy who lives there, his son works in the White House, and that was a huge controversy, and he's running for something, and like there's just so much corruption, and like you wonder how long it's been going on beyond this, or how much is it still going on around us, like that all this kind of thing is just regularly covered up when people die or they're, they commit crimes. And yeah, it's super
Wow.
scary.
Ellie, we have to protect you at all costs, honey. Let me tell you.
Lock your doors.
And it's like I said to you the other day, be sure to take time to get away from the darkness, because I mean, an hour's worth is all I can take. So
I do. I
can't even
felt it
imagine.
lately. I felt it a little bit lately where I want to like, delegate a little bit more and be like, here's the information, guys. I'm going to go breathe over here. So I'm going to the gym a little bit more, which is usually helpful for me to just like run it out and, kind of get really worn out. But then baseball season just started for us. So that's a good, healthy distraction, I think, for us as well.
Yeah.
And
Mets,
it's been nice out.
Yankees.
Oh, no, my kids.
Oh, you mean actual?
Actual. No,
Okay.
Mariners.
Well, you can tell my kids are grown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Literally.
done so are we T-ball or
So we
what
have
level?
one little guy who's like 2 feet tall, but he's somehow moved up to pitching. Like he's aged out of
Yeah.
T-ball, and he's so tiny. Like he's just, he hasn't lost any teeth. He's just, half the size of all his friends. But he's such a good athlete, and he's just so into it. And plus we had, we're in this area that had 900 feet of snow a week ago. And all of a sudden it's 70 degrees, and it just feels like the world is good again, and we can get outside and we can play, and like every kid was at the basketball court on the corner yesterday, and it just felt right. The world felt right.
Life is good.
Yes.
Well, Ellie, wow. I'm almost speechless, to be honest with you. This is just a lot
A
to
lot.
absorb. But you do this every day, all day, every day, it seems like. So I would just, like I said, take care of yourself. Keep doing what you're doing, but don't do more than, more than you need to. And
Thank you.
thanks so much for coming on with me and sort of bringing us up to speed on all the bullshit.
I need a
I'm
shirt that
sorry,
says that.
folks, but I was curious. I just needed to know just
Yeah.
sort of what was going on, because and it's sad. I listen to cable. I've kind of cut the cord on all of the the
Yeah.
news stuff, but you listen to, well, I don't know, MS Now, and I guess they're trying, but
Trying.
they should have you on there. I mean, you're a sort of a known person and look, they've
I
got.
don't want to be. I kind of don't want to.
Yeah, well,
Like I see those like CNN roundtables where they just
Oh
like scream at
no.
each other. I was telling my husband that yesterday. I was like, I would just, even if I thought I had something important to say, it would be lost, and I'd just start crying, and I'd crawl under the table and just like scuttle away. Like I know that I don't want to do that ever.
I was talking to Ahmed Baba yesterday,
Mhm.
and he has kind of scaled it back, probably for self-care reasons. But I've seen him on MS Now, but I've also seen him at that, Abby Phillips round table thing. And he's talking, and it, Kevin, what's his name? The guy from Canada, the Shark Tank guy, and
Oh
then
yeah.
the other O'Leary, and then there's the
Yeah.
other guy that's just always got a smirk on his face. And
The guy who's like the commentator who
Scott.
just is, yeah, Scott Jennings.
Scott Jennings, yeah. And I asked him, I said, so when the camera turns off, are these guys just assholes? And he said, no, actually, they're really nice.
They flip.
Yeah. He said it's like a game almost, or just, where when the camera turns on, all of a sudden, here it comes. And he said something like O'Leary, wherever they go when they leave the set, and O'Leary's like, hey, did you see that movie about, just regular stuff, and you're just going, man, why y'all gotta
I
be
couldn't
like
flip. That would
that?
be hard for me to do. I just like, I'm gonna be.
I can't come on here and just like argue with you. Yeah, I just I do that at home.
Yeah, I know. I gotta. No, that's not enjoyable. I don't.
But no, I told him, I said, yeah, I don't think first of all, they would be looking at me like, dude, you can't curse on here. You know that, right? So
But they do.
I would go off. I really think I
Yeah.
would. But
Yeah.
anyway, until next time, which needs to be
Until
pretty
next time.
soon.
Yeah, let's do it.
Ellie,
Have a
thanks
great
so
day.
much. And by the way, folks, if you're not following Ellie, I really am disappointed in you. So you definitely need to
Oh, guys, that's the
subscribe
worst.
and become a paid subscriber. You know what to do. And
You're
while you're
dad.
at it, I'm the publisher of the Journeyman newsletter.
Yeah.
So subscribe here as well. And
All right.
again, thanks, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right. We'll see you later. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, Marlon.